A sad day for the university. Ilya Shapiro comes to campus, and Brandon Johnson is Chicago's new mayor. I am Jack Moore, here with my co-host Arthur Long, and welcome to episode 3 of the Chicago Thinker podcast. Now, you may notice we have a third person here, and I would like to have him introduce himself before we get into the podcast.
For sure. My name is Ben Oglivie. I am a law student at Chicago Law. I just joined the Thinker this year, and it's been a lot of fun. I like that they are willing to publish my hot takes on things. It's a good deal.
Yes, it's great to have you here, Ben. And it's an unfortunate day that you had to be here. We'd love to talk more about your pieces, and we will in due time. But before we begin, we have to address a very sad event that's happened for the university. Undergraduate Neve Sparks has passed away. I knew Neve personally. I worked with him on a lot of assignments. I worked on him on a potential startup. But he's a wonderful guy, very driven, had a bright future ahead of him, and it's very sad to see him go. We pray for his family, and we hope they're able to give him a proper send-off. And for everyone that knew him and is really going through a tough time right now, we hope that you go to the proper counseling and stay close to your loved ones during this tragic time. Now, on that somber note, Ben, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Life is good.
So,
it's a beautiful day to be alive.
Yeah.
Except it's not beautiful outside, but hey, whatever.
Yes. So tell us about what you wrote, the big article that got a lot of hubbub on the Thinker. So just give you a brief overview, and we'll go into more details right now, and afterwards.
Yeah, for sure. So I was working on a different Thinker article, and I ran across an interview that the Wall Street Journal did with Ilya Shapiro for their weekend interview, and there were some clips of that interview in an article, and the focus was on the illiberal takeover of legal education or something like that. And I thought, hey, I'm a law student. We have thoughts on this. So I wrote a review of Ilya Shapiro's claims in my article. Essentially, Ilya Shapiro is claiming that law schools have been taken over by illiberal forces that repress conservatives, and we need to restore a classically liberal understanding of things on campus. And I argue in my article, yes, the repression is real, but liberalism isn't the answer, it's the problem. And so I published my article, and then the Ilya Shapiro replied to my article, writing an article for the Thinker as well, which is titled Letter Ilya Shapiro Responds to Thinker's Ben Oglivie, and he sort of reaffirmed his ideas, and it went sort of viral in Chicagoland, so it started getting into Slack threads and got posted on SideChat, and we got a little bit of hate in the comments from fellow students about my takes. And then to top it all off, Ilya Shapiro came and spoke at the law school on Friday, this past Friday, which I had not planned. I did not know he was coming to the law school. It just happened that way, and it was great to meet him in person and have like a touch point like that. And we had great attendance at his talk thanks to the traffic we drove through the Thinker. So that made me feel good.
Yes.
And so in your article, Ben, you discuss 6 claims that Shapiro, Chicago Law class of 2003, put forth.
And I'm also going to add in a little comment here about that. So the article I wrote my article about is basically the Wall Street Journal's clips of his interview. And so the 6 claims I list that Ilya Shapiro makes are sort of my stylized clips of some interview he gave, so it might not be totally faithful to him. Just like, I don't know, if Ilya Shapiro is out there listening to this, we're being generous, on the podcast at least.
Sure, so the first claim that you wrote about was he alluded to these diversity, equity, and inclusion activists at law schools trying to replace the rule of law with something resembling critical race theory. And for you said, sure, this is correct, but this isn't the first time they're doing this.
Yeah, more or less. So Ilya Shapiro is really concerned about critical legal theory, and in his mind, he's like, okay, these woke law school professors are trying to replace the rule of law with essentially grievance politics. And my take is that, okay, the rule of law went out the window a long time ago. In my opinion, and I did get flack for saying this, ever since the Warren Court era in the 1960s, the Supreme Court has more or less put liberal principles on a higher pedestal than the Constitution itself. And it's ruled that a number of things are in the Constitution which aren't really there. So one of them was In Brown v. Board specifically, the court ruled that desegregation is unconstitutional. I think segregation was awful. It was abusive to Black Americans, and I'm glad we got rid of it, but I don't think the Supreme Court was the right mechanism for doing that. I'm more fond of like the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I think that was better. The Supreme Court also, like, they legalized abortion by fiat. That's my take. In 1972 with Roe v. Wade. They've gone on to legalize same-sex marriage in Obergefell. And none of this is required by the Constitution. This is required by liberalism, which is the real law now. So, I don't know. So in my opinion, Ilya Shapiro is late to the party. The rule of law is a bigger problem that we have in this country.
Yeah, I agree with you that the rule of law has been under threat for a long time. But you do say something interesting. You know, being on the Warren Court, all these people obviously have great educations. I mean, basically everyone that's on the Supreme Court goes to Harvard or Yale. It's pretty much those two schools. Amy Cody Barrett, being from Notre Dame, is a real exception to the rule most of the time.
I think we'll get some new Chicago people on the court eventually. That's my personal theory.
Yeah, absolutely. We gotta get there.
But I don't know.
But I do want to talk about your next claim because, according to you, this is the claim you address. DEI at law schools is an existential threat to American democracy because brainwashed law grads will soon be getting important jobs in law firms and in the government. But you say false.
That is correct. Ilya Shapiro, I think, has an exaggerated sense of his own the importance of his own cause. And so, in my opinion, DEI is not really a threat to an existential threat to American democracy because on some level, like, American democracy has already been overthrown by the progressive deep state, you could say. So deep state is like the Trumpian term for it. But on some level, it's true. So you have these like liberal law grads who work for federal agencies who've been essentially enforcing progressivism as the law. And they've done things like, so they took Title IX, which is really a bland, boring anti-discrimination law, and used it to essentially force every university in the country to give an annual training on like feminist sexual assault ideology every year to its students, which is what we call Title IX training. If you're listening to this and you've ever been to, if you've been to a university recently, you know what I'm talking about. So my personal take is that Ilya Shapiro is wrong because we've already like gotten there. I mean, well, I don't know. The whole apparatus, like all the bureaucrats that run the government are woke, and they're, you know, and you see this a lot with like environmental regulation too. It's pretty much impossible to build a new mine or a new oil refinery in the US because the environmental bureaucrats believe those things are like evil and they will stop you by sort of doing whatever they need to do to stop you. So anyway.
It's absolutely, I mean, there's been more stories about that right now. I mean, they're trying to push electric vehicles, like trying to get 50% or something like that. Some crazy, unsustainable number that most other departments don't even agree with. They're trying to get that by like 2032 rather than 2050 now. So they're pushing up the timeline by 20 years to some crazy number that's not possible. And they admit it's not possible.
Here's another funny thing. The green activists have been getting in their own way because now they're trying to build like massive like solar projects and wind projects, which are legitimately, they consume a huge amount of land and it's bad for the environment, but they're like, wait a second, our environmental goals are getting in the way of our climate goals. Oh no, we need to like do some more like yes in my backyard things for green energy projects, which might be a good thing. So like even the green activists are getting fed up with the environmental deep state.
So yeah, and then your third claim, this is in the era of safe spaces and trigger warnings. Shapiro claims that law school professors aren't able to openly discuss topics, particularly rape law. You talk about this in your criminal law curriculum, and you agree with him on this.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. So it's the fact that if a law professor expresses any, I don't know, any opinion that's a little bit too heterodox, they might get pushed back from students who might like, I don't know, gang up on them, complain to the dean, complain to some diversity bureaucrat. Mm-hmm. And I think I noticed this a little bit in my criminal law class. So in my criminal law class, we had 2 days to talk about sexual assault law, and in my opinion, the professor got like notably more stressed during those 2 days. It seemed like he was hedging a lot and was unable to like fully articulate his own thoughts, which was not the normal vibe I got in his class. He's normally like a pretty, I don't know, open guy, and he's progressive, of course. And some other, I will say that a number of other law students sort of reached out to me and were like, I didn't really get that vibe from our criminal law professor. I thought he was doing fine. But I think rape law is especially like the most sensitive issue, and the sexual assault activists on campus, for better or worse, are like the most organized and some of the most vocal people. And so like if you, I don't know, like I'm not going to be writing a paper on sexual assault law as a law student. I just don't want to open up that can of worms. I'm going to focus on other topics that are a little less like third rail-ish.
Yeah, it definitely affects your professors a lot, because I mean they have to answer to people who are directly being pressured by these activists that are going for not very clear causes. I mean, like discussing rape law, like it's obviously a very important aspect because it needs to be enforced, because like that's obviously a very heinous crime. But there's always the chance that the administrators that are at the university ultimately kowtow to nothing and really come down hard on these professors for not a whole lot of reason. And that really has to do with your fourth point, which is administrators are the source of this DEI, and many of them should be fired. But you say it's sort of true, but it's extra true that some of these administrators should absolutely be fired. So can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, for sure. So in Shapiro's telling, the university was all fine and good, and they protected free speech until the big bad administrators came along, and they, sort of forced the university to give them sinecures, and they were like, okay, so now we're the diversity bureaucrats. We're going to put you through all this training, and we now have an anonymous reporting system. A lot of schools now have anonymous, like, bias reporting systems, or protected identity harm reporting system. That's what they call it at Stanford. And so Ilya Shapiro sees that as a problem. I think that's not the real root of DEI activism. So in my opinion, DEI is an outgrowth of sort of law students having religious needs. So a lot of law students come in not really having any sort of community to be with, and a lot of them don't really have any sort of religious faith. And law students are kind of materialistic. A lot of people are in it just for the money. They want to get some cushy law firm job that pays $200,000 a year and just rake it in and like have a nice apartment in New York City, and that is what it is. And so the sort of you see these like affinity groups that are so a big activity at law schools is getting together with. You have a bunch of affinity groups on campus. So there's like the Black Law Students Association, the Latino Law Students Association. There's also like the Jewish Law Students Association, the Christian Law Students Association, and these groups are an important source of like community for law students. And then also law students really enjoy and derive a lot of purpose from activism. A lot of kids go to law school, including me on some level, because they want to be involved with politics, with making the world a better place. And these affinity groups are a platform for doing that. And so, like I don't know, each of the different ethnic affinity groups will often host activist type people who come in and might give a talk. They might like send open letters to administrators or lobby for changes on the administrative level that they see as benefiting their group. And in my opinion, that's the real reason why we have DEI. It's the students, it's not the administrators who are the problem.
Yeah, I think you're entirely right, Ben, and this is a problem in law schools that mimics a problem in the wider world in our generation. You have a whole generation of young people living purposeless lives, and there's this big void. And to fill this void, we have all these ridiculous DEI policies and affinity groups that come in to try to fill that lack of religious faith and purpose in life. So
I also have a couple more thoughts on that,
Sure.
And then you can cut in with your thoughts. So two things. Number one, affinity groups aren't all bad. It's really good for kids to have friends in law school, and regrettably, I mean, I don't know, if it's the Black Law Students Association or the Jewish Law Students Association that is like your friend group, hey, I mean, there's something to be said for that. So on some level, it's, I don't know, good. I would prefer for that community to be, from that community and purpose to come from somewhere else, but hey. And my second thought is, okay, so we can't defeat DEI by just like making administrative changes to law schools, which is what Ilya Shapiro wants to do. On some level, you've got to like fill the void with something. So I think conservatives moving forward, we've done a really good job at like, I don't know, complaining about the left is something that conservatives are really good at. But we need to provide some sort of like culture, identity, community to fill the void. And religion is great, but like a lot of kids aren't religious these days. And we need to, I don't know, I don't really see like a great Christian awakening happening anytime soon. And we need to give like elite students and just people in general some other source of community and identity.
Yes, I agree with you.
What sources of community identity would you propose?
That's a great question. I really have no idea. Yeah, I don't know.
We're in the middle of no man's land. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's very obvious that in just the broader culture that people really don't have anything to strive for anymore. I mean, for the longest time, the United States was a majority, like, Christianized nation, and as a general idea, like, everyone derived their morality kind of from that. Not to say that they're all Christian, but, like, that was just kind of the standard. And now that standard's really, like, started to evaporate before our very eyes. So now we're kind of in, like, there's no obvious solution to anything.
Yeah, so I think religion is great. I'm a Latter-day Saint, which is a kind of Christian. I think that there's something really to be said for believing in a church and a faith. I think that's one of the best things that. So I'm not going to say that all Christians are right or that all Christians are conservative or should be, but I think that's a good thing that we have. A second thing, so two people who are doing this, who are doing the work of creating like an identity and a culture on the right are Adrian Vermeule with his common good sort of ideology or like integralism, and Bronze Age Pervert also is another big person here. So both the integralists and both Bronze Age Pervert and his like group have sort of compelling visions for what the good life is and for what young people should do with their lives, and they're both inspiring people to especially like young men are the worst, really. Like we cause all the problems. We're the reasons why prisons exist. But those two groups of people, so like Bronze Age Pervert, I haven't actually read his book. I think in a lot of ways he's a bad person, but like he's inspired a lot of people to join the military. And like Lloyd Austin has not done that. He's a defense secretary right now. And then like the integralists, I mean, integralism is interesting. A lot of people hate on integralists, but the reason why you hear so much hate on integralists is sorry, for those who haven't heard about this, integralism is essentially the idea of making Catholicism into the law of the land. That's more or less how I understand it. And a big person in this movement is Adrian Vermeule, a scholar at Harvard. And obviously that's not really practical in the United States because we don't really have that much Catholicism here anyway. I mean, we have some, and a lot of the people who identify as Catholic aren't really Orthodox. And so integralism is often like made fun of for being fringe, but it's also really compelling. And I don't know. So those are two more like extreme examples. I guess a third example, so I'm in general a fan of like the post-liberal movement. I read, so a big post-liberal publication is Compact Magazine, and I also read like the American Conservative, and I follow some of these ideas. And those magazines are kind of fun. I mean, they publish hot takes, book reviews, that sort of thing. And in my opinion, in my mind, like those kinds of publications, and like the Thinker a little bit, are where we're getting this new culture going. Like the Chicago Thinker, I mean, hey, we have the community here. It's fun. We think interesting thoughts, and it's good.
Well, when we're on the topic of solutions, I'd like to talk a little bit about this fifth claim. You characterize Shapiro as saying that only an exogenous shock can get these law schools out of this DEI fairyland, and you agree with him on this.
Yes, absolutely. So exogenous shock, that's a phrase that I use, and also one that Ilya Shapiro liked and used in his response to me. So law schools have embraced sort of ridiculous like DEI activism, and so law schools just in general, universities in general have embraced progressive cultural activism, and universities themselves are not supposed to be like politically activist institutions. Universities are supposed to be institutions of learning, so like research and scholarship are the main purposes of a university, and also teaching. And the government shovels lots of money to universities so that they can serve this research and teaching function, and it just shouldn't put up with them getting involved with political activism like this. So in my opinion, the federal government should come down hard on universities that do DEI. It should basically ban DEI activities and force universities to fire all of their DEI administrators. And state governments, in the meantime, I mean, hey, we have Joe Biden as president. He's not really interested in this. State governments should get involved and force universities to snap out of it. And you see Ron DeSantis is starting to do this a little bit in Florida, and he's getting a lot of pushback. And in my opinion, he isn't really trying too hard because he wants to run for president, and triggering a mass revolt from academia is not like what he wants to do right now. But like more of Ron DeSantis-ish anti-woke activism is what we need.
Yeah, and that goes flawlessly with your 6th point, which is I think this is where you and Shapiro have your biggest divergence, and I think he talks about it a decent bit, is like, as you took it, at least from what you were seeing in the Wall Street Journal, was that he was arguing that you need a reaffirmation of the classical liberal values on which the universities are like supposedly built upon. But I mean, you disagree with that. I mean, you said so in your article with 3 falses, the last one being capitalized in all forms. So I'd like to hear more about this from you, because a lot of people, at least on a lot of the larger right-wing commentators that most people would know, they're far more bring back the classical liberal tradition. You say no.
Yeah, for sure. So let's back up a little bit. So liberalism is the idea that individual freedom and autonomy is like the most important thing, and that our entire society should essentially revolve around protecting individual rights. And liberalism, I mean, you might hear names like Jean-Jacques Rousseau or John Locke. Liberalism has been around for a long time. And liberalism on the left tends to be expressed as social liberalism. So I especially think of like a loose idea of sexual ethics as being a really distinctive feature of left-wing liberalism. And liberalism on the right tends to focus more on like economic issues. So this means liberalism on the right, a lot of right liberals are really hung up on government and regulations, and this is where we get into like the libertarian space. And Ilya Shapiro is basically a right liberal. He is really, really convinced that liberalism is the truth and that it is the way we need to go. And in that line, he's very in line with like Reagan, Republicans, and that whole tradition of conservatism. And there's a little clip from his reply to me that I want to read. He said, "I'm not so naive as to suggest merely reaffirmation of classical liberal principles, but that should be the ultimate goal that higher ed officials be made to reestablish at their universities." So essentially he believes that he wants universities to be liberal again. And in his mind, liberalism would mean, oh, we let the woke activists do whatever they want. We let the Christians do whatever they want. We give everyone freedom to do whatever they want. That's what he wants for universities. And my argument, and so this is sort of emblematic of a generational divide within conservatism. The older conservatives, the more Reagan conservatives, are classically liberal. You could say classically liberal, so as in harking back to the old tradition of liberalism, not like the 1960s hippie tradition of liberalism. The old Republicans are classically liberal. The new generation of Republicans like me are moving towards what we call post-liberalism. So we want to junk liberal ideology entirely and do something else. And so, what was your question again? Sorry, I know I've been talking a lot.
I mean, I just wanted to hear more about it. I mean, this is, it's kind of an unorthodox opinion.
Yeah.
Among a lot of people, not just,
sure.
I mean, not just among us 3, but like
Yeah.
among most of the people like on this campus,
Definitely.
and broader in the Republican Party.
Yeah, and I think my question would be, this post-liberalism, if it's kind of in response and opposing these this Enlightenment liberalism of Locke and Rousseau, what are kind of the intellectual underpinnings of this post-liberal movement?
Yeah, we can get into that. But first, I want to address the issue of, what was my last take again? Let's see.
That the
Claim of
reaffirmation of classical liberal principles
is not a solution.
Is not the
Yeah,
solution
okay.
at all.
So here's my contention. Liberalism practiced properly is repressive. So the reason why we have DEI is essentially because liberals want to have maximum freedom and autonomy for individuals, and that requires repressing individuals who have what we might call traditional, or what some would say prejudiced beliefs. And a good example of this is sexual liberalism. So the LGBT movement, as we all know, is very vocal, and LGBT people can't really live out their lives fully without some level of moral approval from everyone else. So like you can't, I don't know, take your kids to drag queen story hour and like be very openly gay unless people are willing to accept you, and unless the people who have people who believe in, I don't know, more traditional sexual ideas, like the idea that sex should only be between a man and a woman who are married, unless those people are repressed and aren't allowed to like express their beliefs and live their beliefs. So essentially, like in my opinion, DEI and progressive repression on campuses is liberalism. It's the fullest expression of liberalism. It's like this is taking classical liberal principles all the way. Mm-hmm. And so my solution to that would be, I think universities should be focused on their public mission, and that is to do scholarship and to engage in research and teaching, essentially. And that means, yes, we do need freedom on university campuses, but liberalism enforced at the edge of a knife is not really acceptable for universities. It's not acceptable for DI activism to be happening at universities because it interferes with this public mission. And in line with that, the government should come in and, I guess, enforce the mission of universities at the expense of DEI, and that would entail, I don't know, bringing back some more freedom to people like Christians or people who have traditional beliefs about sex or whatever. That's my take.
Interesting. And then Jack, Ilya Shapiro wrote a response to Ben's article.
Yeah, I mean, Ben talked about earlier, like in particularly I'm not so to suggest merely reaffirmation of classical liberal principles. I think that's really the crux of what he's saying. I mean, like, what Shapiro is really arguing is that sort of the monopoly, the soft monopoly that people have, like the institution, like the universities, like the soft monopoly that progressives have on what's being taught there sort of indoctrinates the next generations of those who are going to be in positions of power. And let's be honest, like at the University of Chicago, law schools like Columbia, like Georgetown, those are going to be people that are going to be put in positions that can actually have major effects on everyday lives of individuals. I mean, Georgetown is in the middle of DC. Like the amount of contacts you have, 2 politicians there. I'm sure they sent plenty of people up on the Hill itself. Like it really matters that they've controlled this. Now, I mean, Shapiro's answer is that the monopoly needs to be busted, just not probably via the arm of the state, but more conservatives going into that particular sphere and creating some sort of free speech type dynamic where there's an actual conflict going on between people in the university itself and not people who have the law degrees and then people who get left out. I think that's what he's trying to get at least in some broader part. Maybe I've kind of editorialized it a bit. But. So
here's my take on what I think Shapiro wants. So Ilya Shapiro wants the federal government to come in and essentially like ban DEI. I think that's, so he's written state level legislative proposals to that effect and also a federal level proposal. And my argument is that this doesn't really go far enough because universities, I mean, they're filled to the brim with these bureaucrats. They are not going to take this lying down. They're going to fight back. Any sort of ban on affirmative action or DEI will be subverted by university bureaucrats and by university professors as well. So I think there needs to be like a more total transformation. I think the sorts of bans that Ilya Shapiro is advocating for are kind of more like cosmetic in nature, and they don't go nearly as far enough. So I'd love to see like the Department of Education, I don't know, get really intrusive about, and like the university system is more messed up broadly as far as like, I don't know, student debt, and there's a bunch of issues that need to be fixed. But I would love to see like more tight regulations on like what administrators can be hired at universities, for instance, and like affirmative action just needs to go. I think the Department of Education should go like full like desegregation level of intervention at universities to root out affirmative action and to make sure that they are not like considering race or diversity at all in the students that they admit and in the faculty that they hire.
Yeah, Shapiro definitely doesn't sound like he's trying to overthrow the entire system. He's more or less just trying to put a quick fix in, trying to change course.
He's too libertarian. I mean, he's not willing to like force schools to stop. He just wants, I don't know, that's my take.
Yeah, and then the cherry on top of this whole thing was this Friday, a few days ago, Ilya Shapiro came to speak at the law school. And even before Shapiro's appearance at the law school, Ben's article and then Shapiro's response to Ben's article stirred up a bit of a firestorm at the law school and in the undergraduate community. And before Shapiro appeared to speak at the law school this past Friday, he was greeted by chalked messages in the concrete that some read, "No civil debate with uncivil people," "White supremacists are not welcome," and lastly, "Racism is hate speech, not free speech." So I find this a little ironic. It's like you said, it's kind of liberalism taken to its fullest extent, that Shapiro, on the day that he's going to come speak to U Chicago Law School, is greeted with these chalked messages.
And like Lee Shapiro holds up U Chicago as a model of free speech. He's like, okay, this is the school that does it best, and I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess we don't really have total like freedom of speech in Chicago in a sense. It's not if you're afraid of chalk.
Yeah, we've talked about this before. The I can't remember how to say their name, but the institution that goes around and does all these free speech like assessments, like it has university at the top, but that's only because of essentially like our professors here are actually very okay with free speech. The students are abysmal about those sorts of policies, which is where a lot of the issues come from.
I don't know. You have a mix. I feel like I don't know. It really is across the gamut. And U Chicago, to their credit, the administration of U Chicago is like very good about, I don't know, free expression and letting people host events and stuff. So
Yeah, and the administration and the professors are good, but I think
nice.
the students overall are not. I mean, I remember occasionally the pro-life group here will chalk up the sidewalk with some pro-life messages, and almost immediately, I remember last year after that happened, they were covered up and washed out, and people got a big uproar over it. These things that they're chalking for Ilya Shapiro are ridiculous. It's essentially, oh, you're a conservative, therefore you're a fascist, and therefore you're not allowed to speak or debate. So it's ridiculous, but then again, if they want to chalk up the sidewalk, they can chalk up the sidewalk, but what they're basically saying is only one group can chalk up the sidewalk, only one group is allowed to speak and debate, and I think it just ties in very well to your argument, Ben, that it's just, liberalism is not going to work, and it's not going to stop this stampede of these woke leftists.
And like more broadly too, so liberal students see any sort of like criticism of them or any sort of suggestion that their lifestyle isn't totally valid as like harm. And you see this come up a lot. So I think a number of undergraduates and law students who read my piece really felt offended by it and felt like I was trying to like lash out at rape survivors or black law students. Those are two groups that specifically get mentioned in the comments. And like, I don't know. I don't have anything against those groups. I wish them well. If you're in either category, I mean, I really do wish you the best and don't want it to be mean or anything. But yeah, the idea that like any sort of disagreement is harm is definitely liberal, and it makes sense. I mean, I don't know. In my opinion, it makes sense in a sense.
Yeah. Well, we're getting a little close on time, and we have one more thing we want to talk about. We're glad to have you on to talk about the article, but it's just wonderful to hear these new ideas, and you're obviously a strong voice and a thinker, and we love to have you on this podcast. And if you have any thoughts about what we're going to cover next, very, very quickly, because time's getting a little long, we would be remiss to not talk about the election that took place in Chicago for the mayoral seat, and Brandon Johnson's ultimate victory. Perry Zhao ran a wonderful analysis piece entitled Hyde Park Lightfoot Voters in Showers of Union Money Elected Brandon Johnson Mayor. Will Chicago rue the day, being that final question. And he really catalogs essentially how Johnson takes over Lightfoot's position and wins the mayoral seat over Paul Vallis in sort of what was an upset win. And there's been a lot of talk about this nationally. Hopefully everything goes well and the worst does not come, but it doesn't look really good for Chicago moving forward. It kind of seems like in response to Lori Lightfoot, who everyone was not very fond of, they just elected another version of Lori Lightfoot who might be even farther left than she was. So it's the developments are still to come. It's obvious it's very early in his term, but yeah, it's definitely something that we should keep our eye on.
I have some takes for you. So I consider myself like a hobby poll watcher a little bit. And I know politics is more of an art than a science, and other people are better artists than me. But like, So in my personal opinion, the most interesting thing about the Chicago election is that black voters really didn't identify with Vallis's campaign. They felt like he was on the Republican team, not on the Democrat team. And we've seen a similar dynamic too in both Los Angeles and in New York City. So in like LA, New York, and Chicago, in all three of those cities, we see basically like a pro-police moderate Democrat running against a progressive Democrat. And in all three of those cities, the more like moderate Democrat was not able to capture a majority of votes. The majority went to the progressive side. The only reason why Eric Adams, a pro-police candidate, won in New York City is because New York City has a messed up runoff system for mayoral elections, which is why he was able to take it out. So I guess in my mind, the real lesson is that like you can't win over black voters or urban voters in general if you're a member of the neoliberal establishment. I think Republicans or even like more moderate Democrats need to have a more populist angle if they want to, like Willie Wilson is a good example of this. Willie Wilson is a populist, he's black, and he's kind of conservative. He may be the most conservative person who ran in the runoff election. Or not in the runoff election, in the election for mayor, and he got like 20% of the vote in a lot of black districts. And if Paul Vallis had done just as well as Willie Wilson had, he would be mayor here, and if he did just as well in black districts as Willie Wilson. So, I don't know. Those are my thoughts.
Very briefly, Chicago's going to hell. I think this is a really, really bad development for the city. Johnson is a legitimate socialist who's propped up by the teacher unions and has described defunding the police as an actual, real political goal. We've seen what's happened across the country when we demonize the police force and don't allow them to do their jobs. And I think this summer is going to be a hot summer full of lots of crime, and more businesses are going to continue to leave the city. And it's really upsetting for the University of Chicago and Chicago residents.
I'm a little more moderate. I mean, I think it's just going to be more of the same. Chicago's going to continue to be a great place to live for like young professionals, but hey, I mean, crime and taxes are going to be kind of high, and that's the way it's been before. And I don't know.
Well,
that's my take.
It'll be good for young professionals until they get shot. But
that's fair.
Anyways, thanks for listening for this episode of the Chicago Thinker podcast, and don't forget to outthink the mob.